So I hope everyone is finding the Innovation Conference engaging and valuable so far. We'll start with a couple of introductions. So my name is Laine, and I will facilitate this session, how the most experienced organizations continue to advance their employee listening programs. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist and a senior consultant with Perceptics. We have a guest speaker with us today, Bethany Doleman. Bethany, will you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Bethany Doleman. I'm from AbbVie, where I'm the Director of People Insights. For those of you who are not familiar with AbbVie, we are a 50,000 employee global organization, headquarters just north of Chicago. You may have seen our ads on television. We're the company that makes Humira, but we also do a whole bunch of other things. We also look at that's immunology, neuroscience, oncology. We recently went through a major acquisition. So we went from about 28,000 employees to now we're just under 50. So a couple of 6 months into that, still kind of dealing with the acquisition and different data sets. That was an acquisition of a company called Allergan, so bringing them into our portfolio of pharmaceuticals. Prior to AbbVie, I spent time at a couple of different organizations, State Farm, Monsanto Bayer, and at Nike. I have my doctorate in quantitative psychology and a master's in statistics from UIUC here in Illinois, and have kind of spent my HR professional career dealing with data. I'm a part psychologist, part statistician, so similar background to an IO psychologist. I don't have the formal training of one, but I play one on TV. And really just excited to be here to share some best practices that I've seen both at AbbVie and just in other organizations that have had very different approaches to how do we work with HR analytics and HR data.
Thank you, Bethany. We're privileged to have you with us today. And we have a couple others with us today as well. We have Brittany Head and Sarah Stites. So they will be managing the QA feature. So we want to remind everyone that you can ask questions throughout the session using that QA feature, and please provide feedback as well. All right, so a bit about the session then. So the session description that you may have seen when you signed up is when you've just about checked all the boxes for a solid employee listening program, what's next? Accelerate your program to ludicrous speed and race the way forward. We'll begin the session by defining run. What characteristics classify an organization as one of the most advanced? Next, we'll jump into the value of run. Why strive to advance internal listening programs and strategies? Then we'll move into transitioning to run. First, is your organization ready to transition from walk to run? And then how can you transition successfully? We'll talk about clients that run. What are they doing differently or uniquely? And then finally, where can you learn more? And a hint, it's part of the Innovation Conference. We have 2 open discussions scheduled during our session today. We want to replicate an in-person experience as much as possible. One of the key benefits of in-person sessions is the ability to network and learn from one another. So the open discussions will provide opportunities to share your experiences, your lessons learned, and where you are in your journey, for example. So please take advantage of the QA within Zoom to participate with us, the facilitators, and other attendees. The QA is fully monitored by our Perceptics team. So again, Brittany and Sarah are monitoring that consistently today. And so we're also available to answer questions throughout the session. So now let's dive in. First, what do we mean when we say run? We'll start with characteristics that classify an organization as one of our most advanced. When we look at this list of characteristics, it's important to remember that an organization may have some, but not all of these in place. A few key characteristics: moving from an HR focus to influencing business goals and strategy. Individuals within your organization and within HR who understand data analysis and interpretation. Having advanced tools and technology to optimize the process, and the ability and confidence for widespread reporting. Finally, frequent listening. This could be an annual census as well as pulse or topical surveys and/or life cycle surveys, so onboarding and exit, and an advanced survey design. Our Perceptics consultants are here to assist you with this last point. So now, why accelerate your employee listening program? What's the value of the advanced strategies that we'll discuss? HR will contribute to strategy and business goals. Analytics will be leveraged for business and talent decisions. A story will be told that integrates multiple sources of employee data and feedback. Action and follow-up will be timelier and more proactive. And finally, deeper insights about your employee population can be gained. Organizations that connect employee engagement to the overall experience and larger organizational goals and performance are better equipped and able to see how taking action reflects in the organization. Bethany, what value have you realized at AbbVie by using the next level run approach?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that not everything we do is a run, and it's important to acknowledge that. I would say just like if you're training for a marathon, you don't start off at a marathon unless you're Galen Rupp, and then you might start off at a marathon. First, you get off the couch and start walking, then you start jogging, then you start doing interval training until you really get up to that run stage. So it does take some time, it does take some energy, it takes a lot of support from higher level leaders to walk through that process. I think one thing that I really pay attention to are where are those differentiators? Where do we want to be at a run for? And it's not across the board in all of our reporting. Some reporting is still very simple and straightforward. Things that are seemingly simple, such as counting headcount, are actually relatively complex when you start thinking about it. The alignment with finance, the alignment with total rewards. How do we think about headcount? Even something as simple as that becomes complex early. And so kind of keep things simple that can be kept simple, and then pay attention to what the organizational priorities are and think through ways that we can go deeper onto those. If there is an organizational priority to start setting up a new line of business, start thinking through, okay, how can insights, how can analytics help support that? And that should be your major focus. You don't have to run at everything. You need to start kind of moving into it and building that foundation so that you can get up to those advanced analytics. But without a foundation, you'll run into a world of hurt.
Great points. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. And so you may be asking, how do you know if your organization is ready to race the way forward? If you're checking the boxes above successfully, you may be ready to race the way forward with the advanced strategies. And again, this may be checking some, but not all of the boxes. Much of the transition involves centralized data and the partnership of people analytics teams and leaders. Additionally, it's gauging your organizational readiness for sharing insights broadly throughout the organization, collecting data more frequently and timely, and having tools in place, both analytics tools and listening tools, in order to race forward. If your organization is checking the majority of these boxes, you may be ready to strategize about moving into the run classification. And when you're ready to transition, it's important to do a few things. 1, have a strategy and a plan. 2, form key partnerships throughout your organization. 3, develop and refine data analysis and interpretation skills across HR. And 4, evaluate reporting and delivery mechanisms. If resources are needed to ramp up or increase readiness, begin to craft that plan. As you build a strategy and a plan, the 5 questions on this slide are beneficial. So the 5 questions are, at what touch points will you survey? What data will you collect? What analyses will you conduct? What business decisions will you contribute to? And who is responsible for the implementation, analysis, and follow-up? So all 5 of those questions seem very straightforward, but once you dig in, they can become much more complex. And those are questions that really deserve some thought as you get ready to transition. And on that note, Bethany, I'd like to ask you, did you find any additional keys to success as you helped your organization transition that you're willing to share with the group?
Yeah, and I think that buying at the top is critical. I luckily have a CHRO that really truly believes in metrics. When you hear him talk, he brings up metrics in every conversation I'd say I ever have with him, but it's more broadly. In every conversation he has, he talks about the metrics and talks about how important it is to measure things consistently over time. So that is once we have that, it makes our jobs a lot easier. We're not trying to push that rope, he's pulling on it. I think that along with that, we also have a very strong culture with prioritization. And so knowing what our organizational practices are, what we're going to be going after in the long term and the short term, HR then aligns to that. And then I align my priorities against what HR is going after. I think of people analytics, it's an HR priority, but it's also embedded across other HR priorities. So as we start thinking about kind of how do we put the right information in front of business leaders, in front of our HR partners, it's listening to the business. It's understanding where's the business going, how do they need our help and support, and then capacity-wise and kind of sophistication of approach-wise is how we approach that. I think that the prioritization, the fewer you can focus on, the better. And so go for those that are bigger, that have some meat on their bones. I want to walk away at the end of the year and say, these were the big 4 things that I accomplished. And my head of talent, who we report up through, my CHRO are all like, yes, and those changed how we do business. It's not a list of 100. I know that I've been at other organizations where that prioritization and that strategy was not as strong. I remember one example where I had like a vice president walking down the hall, and she was carrying, it was like a 200-page document that had HR priorities for this year. And I kind of jokingly said, like that's not prioritization. Like it's 10. Like if you can't count them on 2 hands, there's too many of them. How do we get just very, very focused with our prioritization? That drives the alignment, and that makes for happier employees at the end of the day as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that point about prioritization, and that should certainly be part of the plan and the strategy. Is how do you narrow down maybe all of the things that you want to do into, to your point, Bethany, a handful or 2 handfuls of priorities rather than 200. That's so important.
Exactly.
Definitely. All right, and so we've come to our first opportunity here for open discussion. So I have a few discussion starters here on this slide, and of course, questions are welcome throughout this as well. So the questions provided are only starters. So please talk to us in QA about where your organization is on the journey, any keys to success that you've found, or learning experiences, for example. If you have questions, please add those too, and we'll take about 10 to 15 minutes for this exercise. So again, we really want to replicate that in-person experience where we would all be in a room talking and learning from one another, sharing stories. So let's get that QA box going. Our facilitators are managing that. They're responding there as well. So again, I encourage everyone to participate and get the most out of this opportunity to collaborate. And we will start the session back up, start talking again in about 10 to 15 minutes.
So this is Brittany again. It's fun to see people starting to fill in the chat to get a sense of who's in the room. We've got, almost 50 people in attendance. And so to see that some are looking to become runners. I have a few clients personally in the list as well, who I'd classify between runners and really close to running. So it's neat to see folks wanting to kind of get a sense of if they're here or what they can do to get over that hump. And I think to Bethany's point, maybe you are a runner in one sense, leader buy-in, or you've got some crazy stuff going on with your survey design, but there's work to be done in other places. So maybe not 100% run, but 70% run, 50% run, or you have a run aspect to your project. That's cool. So for those of you who are putting in that you're a runner, fantastic, own it. What would you say about your program? You hold up and think this is runner. What's like the number one thing, or What would you share there? Because we've gotten a few people owning the runner. That's very cool.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And I like what we've talked about too. It's about checking some of the boxes, not all of the boxes. You could be doing incredible things, along some lines, and you still have some room to advance along others. I think that's an important thing to note. It's really about the continuum. Run is a continuum. It's not necessarily are you running or are you not. It's are you along that continuum, and how do you continue to advance even after you're a runner? There are ways to continue to elevate your program and take that to the next level.
Yeah. Well, and that just feeds into Bethany's point earlier too, right? If you're really a runner, you don't get off the couch and just run a marathon. And then once you run the marathon, you're not, well, now I'm a runner for life. Never picking up the pace again. I've done it. So yeah, continuing to keep running. So along those lines, we're getting a question in. How do you go about setting a strategy when priorities are constantly changing? So this year, 2020 is a good example. Research topics and survey plans might have been waylaid, in favor of unexpected research or on-demand needs. Is even flexing that agility muscle and being responsive part of being a runner? Is it committing and setting in stone what you're going to do strategy wise? Weigh in on that, maybe both of you. That'd be really interesting.
And let me jump into this because we took a right-hand turn about 3 weeks before our survey was set to open, in that we realized that our approach wasn't as timely and as in the moment as we would have liked to be. So our standard, every year, every other year approach of asking for feedback, it wasn't gonna reflect the questions that we really wanted to ask this year. So if my Perceptics people are on the call, they're probably cringing right now because I gave them a phone call and said, hey, what happens if we go through and change all of the items? And we have 3 weeks and we still need to get through works councils. And luckily Perceptics, they were like, challenge accepted. Like, this is what we need from you. This is where we need it. They allowed me to control the internal conversations, to get approval from my head of talent, my CHRO, my CEO, to push on that side. And then they were there getting everything up and running from a survey design perspective. So I think that, because you're running, you can make a right-hand turn a lot faster. You have that foundation in place. I know who I had to call from a works council, who I had to get on the phone call with the next morning. It wasn't like I was trying to do that for the first time. And so I think that, like, once you're in shape, it's a lot easier to go out and do a marathon than starting from scratch. And so how do we pay attention to that? How do we have set processes? And our strategy is collecting employee feedback. It's not, we're going to administer a survey on this date to this organization. It's that as an organization, voice of the employee matters. And it matters to our CEO, it matters to our board of directors, it matters to every single leader in the organization. And so we're able to align against that. And maybe the mechanism looks a little bit different, but we have a strong strategy and approach and a really strong communication plan to let people know, hey, we're changing things for this year. Don't worry, we're going to go back and we're going to circle around to you with our standard approach. It just doesn't make sense to do right now. And we got a lot of really good feedback around, thank you for not ignoring what's happening to people. Thank you for being timely. Thank you for being agile. Thank you for listening to our feedback. And we got a lot of good kind of pats on the backs to be able to adjust so quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's key. That's a great example, Bethany. And that's where I was going to go with this as well. My clients personally who are running were able to adjust and adapt and be flexible based on the 2020 environment. We were able to say, so maybe we're not doing this pulse survey this year, but we're going to do a COVID survey or a return to work survey or a diversity and inclusion survey. And we were standing those up in 48, 72 hours with some of those clients, and they were pushing the bar on items. They had a plan already about how that data would be used, communicated back to the organization. So it wasn't part of that initial priority or that initial strategy, but as the environment changed, they were able to so quickly flex and still be laser focused on that employee feedback and still gather that, but maybe in a much different way. and in a way that worked for those business priorities at the time, which I think was critical and set a large group of, clients that I work with apart. It would have been just as easy in the year 2020 to say, let's pull back and not do this at all. Let's pull back and not listen to our employees, which in my opinion would not have been the most beneficial route. But on the other hand, they did the opposite. They said, let's flex, let's go forward, let's race, we're ready for this. And we did incredible things with many clients.
It reminds me, if you know me, I love analogies of the faster you're going, the easier it is to turn, to Bethany's point of, it reminds me of power steering. Like if you don't have power steering, like the faster you're going, the easier it is to turn that wheel. And maybe I'm dating myself anyway, but it's good to be on that front end. I know. Thank you, Bethany. It's good to be on the front end and be able to adjust your intake of data, right? And having those stakeholders ready to, okay, we have an issue. Let's be bold. Let's be resilient. Let's be responsive and let people know we care and that we're listening. We're getting a few questions and then we should probably move on about bringing managers along with you. So, and how to use that data, thinking about where that data goes. So maybe the after effects of being flexible with your survey intake process, and then where does that data go? How do you loop people in? How do you kind of build capabilities and buy into what happens with that data after?
Yeah, and I would be happy to take this. And Bethany, I also would love your perspective on this. So I think part of it is there's a ramp up period when you start reporting broadly through an organization. When that data drops to the manager, it's about, what is your confidence, your willingness to do that? How prepared is your manager population to interpret that data and do the right things with it? So it's often a ramp up period. Perceptyx offers some training around that. Many of my clients use internal training resources, and it starts small, maybe in year one. Maybe that's its own crawl, walk, run approach. Maybe in year one, managers get very simplified reports of their teams, maybe highest, lowest favorability, a few key drivers. And by year 3, maybe they're getting full reporting. Maybe they're getting some open-ended comments even. But it's about, like many things, building that capability and a very clear communication and providing the resources they need along the way as well.
And I would just echo that, is that there isn't an easy button and every organization is different. How do you think through communication? How do you think through training? How do I leverage my other HR business partners in order to deliver some of that? How do we train them in order to act as kind of a triage? It takes a lot of work, and the more thoughtful you can be about it, the more you can kind of decentralize some of that knowledge. The more included managers will be, the more support you're going to get, and the more they're going to care about the data coming out of it, which makes it more likely that they're going to make actions based off of it.
Absolutely. And so on that note, I see that we're almost at 1 o'clock. I want to be very mindful of time. We have one more open discussion section coming up. So I want to continue discussing, but I also want to get through a few more slides here. So let's start with then, I want to share a few examples of clients who we work with, who we consider runners. So what makes them advanced? What do they do differently? I think this is the part that we're all excited to hear about. And Bethany has already given us some insight into that. But I want to talk about a few things that set clients apart, right? So they survey frequently, whether that's census, life cycle, pulse, those strategic or topical pulse surveys. So I mentioned, the COVID surveys or the D&I surveys. Some of our clients even administered racial injustice surveys. So those topical surveys as well. They align the survey program to talent and business strategy. So it's very intentional when to survey, what questions to ask, what data to collect. So those clients are not just surveying for the sake of surveying. There is a plan around that. It's all predetermined. It's intentional. Next, they integrate data. So a great example of this that I just worked on frequently or relatively recently is An integrated dashboard for attrition risk, right? So a client that I work with integrated engagement and exit data into a single dashboard so that they could look at attrition risk across their organization. So it's not just surveying sporadically, it's how do we pull all of that together and tell a story in some way. That's important. Pushing the bar on questions. So clients who run oftentimes will push the bar and ask directly about topics of interest. So it's no longer the historic questions that we've always approved in the past. It's let's get exactly to what we want to know. Let's push the bar. Let's even be a bit risky on what we're asking at times to get to what we need to know and to get the data that we need. Finally, they link data from throughout the organization. So this could be customer data, performance data, turnover data, any of that objective employee data that lives throughout your organization, or maybe even in an HRIS system. We're pulling that data in and saying things like, well, how do our top performers feel? What's different? How is the experience different across some of these things? Or is there a relationship between some drivers of engagement and our customer perceptions even? You know, we have that data, so we can start to integrate that. And so those are just a few things. And Bethany, again, this is where I would like to call you to speak a little bit about, you know, there may be other opportunities to talk about aspects of the program that set you apart that we're really interested in hearing.
And one example I can give is I saw a comment come up around different HRIS systems. And so absolutely, like that foundational data needs to be correct. We're actually on 2 different instances of HRIS systems with our newest acquisition. I did get a comment back from kind of business leaders as we were pushing out the results of our most recent survey. And they were asking questions around, okay, how are you accounting for this? Being the data people, we were able to answer those. I got comments back like, wow, this is cleaner than everything else you guys have, because everything else is coming from disparate systems. We made sure to have a good, solid foundation, a good, solid core that we really, really understand. And it's a snapshot, and we can think of it like that. So we remove some of the noise when it comes to that and really focus in on, you know, from an organizational perspective, what are the enterprise actions that we're taking based off of those? What are those enterprise results? And then shifting it more towards, you know, for business leaders in particular, how am I different from that? Still keeping those enterprise results in mind, but helping them think through not only from an organizational perspective, but what is unique to me and my team. You know, every function I have ever worked with in every organization is a unique snowflake. Like, yes, you guys are unicorns, you are different than everything else. So how do we meet them in the middle? How do we get them to trust the data, to understand the data, and then to kind of stop poking holes in the data and really think about what is the data telling me? And it might not be perfectly aligned with how they think about the data, but this is data directly, this is their feedback from their organization. These are your employees trying to tell you something. This is what you need to act on, and this is how you make progress on it. I would say that at AbbVie, we have a very transparent organization. And because data is so embedded throughout all of AbbVie, and especially within HR and in the talent organization, that's the expectation that we set, is that people are comfortable with it. They think about trending data. I think it makes our job harder because people are so involved in it and embedded in it, and they are held accountable to it, but they really care about it. And so it's a kind of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility type of an approach. But it's how do we turn those into our supporters? How do we make sure that we have a good, solid foundation? And then how do we enable the people that we work with to drive change throughout the organization?
That's great. Thank you. And I appreciate too, before I jump into this slide, and I am mindful of time, you talked a little bit about HRIS systems. It's so important, and it's a bit out of the scope of what we're talking about today, although it fits. You know, you hear words like data governance, you know, things like that, large words tossed around, but ultimately, bottom line is we need to make sure that our data is centralized, that it's trustworthy and reliable, and that there's data integrity there. Not just our survey data, but with any data that we're pulling in to integrate with our survey data. And a lot of that relies on an HRIS system. It's how you're keeping that organizational data together And so, that's part of, as you're ramping up to this run state, that you want to look at is how is your data governance? How is all of that data housed? Is it trustworthy? Can it be brought in? And maybe that's even a first step as you're preparing to transition in. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think it lives on a slide somewhere, but I hadn't directly acknowledged it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. And so we do have another session. So the people analytics session will outline the crawl, walk, run approach to people analytics, which leverages multiple data sources, including survey, life cycle, and organizational data. Be sure to turn into this session with Alex Aguilar and Brett Wells to learn more about people analytics and platform enhancements as you take your survey program to the next level. So we've talked a lot today about the beginning steps. So what is run? How do we define it? What's the value? How do you transition? I really hope that you join Alex and Brett to jump into the platform and really see what we're capable of. So they will deep dive into analytics and the tool itself and take this section really to the next level. So if you attended here today, please find their session, attend there as well. So just a plug for them, but truly an honest plug. I think you'll find a lot of value out of that as well. Right. And we have one last opportunity for open discussion, which truthfully is my favorite part. So once again, everyone jump into chat and QA. Let's talk a little bit about what we learned today, what you're most eager to take back to your organization, what you may want to do additional research on when you get back. And then of course, any questions, as you have the whole group here to sort of build those. You can have the Perceptics point of view. You have Bethany here from that client side who has a lot of applied and practical experience here. So please hit us with questions, with thoughts, network together, and we'll spend the last few minutes here before wrapping up.
Hey, maybe you nailed it. I'm not seeing much coming in to chat or Q&A, and that's okay. I will say the people analytics session ran yesterday and today, and so both of those are recorded and they will be made available along with all the other materials and sessions that you may or may not have had the opportunity to attend on a resources page that we'll publish following the conclusion of the innovation conference, and we'll push that out to everybody. So be looking for that invite and access coming your way if you've attended today. And while I tried to eat up time, it looks like we got a question coming in. When you're looking at beginning a centralized dedicated analytics team, what's the ratio of analyst to teammate headcount that makes sense to start with? So kind of how much in-house do you need?
Bethany, I think you're the most qualified on the call to speak to that.
I've done it before. I'll probably do it again. I would say it's less of a number, but what sorts of capabilities do you need? And you need that foundation. We need to have data coming to us. We can't report out on headcount if we're not centrally capturing it anywhere. I think right now, we're on different HRIS systems. I won't mention how many ATS systems we're bringing data in from, but our clients don't know, unless they don't know that everything is different. So there's a lot of kind of data manipulation in the back end to make sure that when things go out, we do provide a single source of truth. I would say that is foundational, that is core. If you don't have that on your team, that is a very good place that you want to look in to build up capability. Once you get your arms wrapped around that, then you kind of progress up the HR analytics maturity model. Then you can go out to do reporting. Then you can go out to do some more deep dives into research. But until you can count headcount, you can't report out on it. You can't look at turnover. You can't look at attrition. I would say one thing to be careful about is going through that maturity curve too quickly. You really need an organization to develop with you. And this is not just me trying to buy time to be able to get more work done, but you need to take the organization, you need to take your talent partners along for the ride on it. If you're starting from scratch, you need to build up that foundation, you need to get all the data together. You need to do a good job of auditing it. So part of that relies on the partnerships where I don't own my HRIS systems, I don't know my ATS systems, but we provide feedback to the people that own those when we see things that are going on in the data. And every day we're finding something different, people getting misclassified into different locations. I'm trying to think of what just came through today. People on the talent analytics side turning off auto dispositioning, and so people are just kind of floating around. Like when we see that coming out in the data, how do we get back to the people that own those systems, and how are we really good partners and work together well on it? Mm-hmm. Once you start kind of getting there, then you're going from a walk to a jog. Then you start doing more reporting. I'm always wary about companies that want to jump into the deep end or go straight into running. They don't have the data to be able to support it. Your HR analytics team will get frustrated. Your business partners will get frustrated. Your executive team will get frustrated because you're just not there yet. You don't have the data to be able to do some of the fun, fancy stuff that we like to do. So it really is a build type of a process. I would say, again, from a capability, one of the things that I always look for is people that can do more than one thing. And so it's not just that they can, build a data lake or manipulate data. They're also experts at how do we build Tableau dashboards, or how do we capture other data from different sources? How do we incorporate that in? And so the more multifaceted you can be, the faster you can progress through some of those stages. I always think back to when big data first started to become a thing. And I went through graduate school before big data was a thing. And when big data, those terms started coming up, and I started going to conferences trying to learn more, there were two separate tracks. It was the people that managed big data sources and the people that used big data. And there was very little overlap. And then you would see kind of projects come to fruition, and the people that were waiting for the data to be built would show up, and the people that had the data would show up. And if that's the first time they're having a conversation, that data is never useful. There has to be this holistic conversation from start to finish around requirements gathering. What's the data that we have? What do we want it to look like when it comes out at the end? And really thinking through a thoughtful process around that, having time to be able to do it in the right way, to stakeholder manage in the right way. But it really needs to be an end-to-end solution that you build towards with that end goals in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And hearing you talk about that too, I was thinking back to when I was in graduate school, and I'll likely date myself a bit here. We read an article, and I won't call the name of the article, but essentially the article was how HR was a soft function with many sort of checkmark activities and never really had a seat at the table. HR wasn't tied to business results or to strategy, and they weren't in the room, having the conversations. And so as that's evolved over the last 10 plus years since I've left grad school and really been a part of HR and consulted for HR, HR does have a seat at the table now. This people analytics, we rely so heavily on the teams, and they're so valuable. But HR also has a place at the table. HR can also refine their skills and have these data analysis and interpretation conversations and really get that seat at the table. They can work with the people analytics teams. It's become more of a science and more, linked to those bottom line results than it has been in 10, 15 years prior. So in addition to building up that analytics team, which again is so important, I think it's also important to build your HR team, build capabilities around data within your HR team. If not to take on a lot of that function, just to have conversations, have that seat at the table, interact with your people analytics leaders and teams and have those really close partnerships. So again, another plug for HR. I think it's important to have both, right? Not one or the other, but to have both.
For sure.
Thank you so much. I think with the time left, Kara and Bethany, if you had any last thoughts or any other points you want to make sure we land with the group before we move on. And you had a finishing slide, Kara.
Yes, I really want to thank everyone for their time and for attending. We hope it was valuable for you and that you learned things that you can take back to your organization. So that's really, I was planning to wrap up. Bethany, is there anything else in the few minutes left?
No.
All right.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for kind of asking all the questions. It makes me start thinking through, oh, geez, 2021 is going to be here soon, and I need to make sure that my strategy is on point.
It is right around the corner. The holidays are
It is.
coming.
Yep. So what we've got left next, we have 3 different, again, research presentations coming up by Nick, Jonathan, and Brad from our team. And then finishing up with Mark and Sham, our professional services and product, talking about how we bring those together to, again, think through 2021 and what's coming. So that'll help us all run faster. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you around the conference.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Take care.